I'll start with the big news. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., WDI USA will be in Washington, D.C., as we join a broad coalition of organizations, um, including LGBT Courage Coalition, Do No Harm, Partners for Ethical Care, LGB Alliance, Women's Liberation Front, and other groups opposed to child medicalization in an action on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court. This action will take place during oral arguments in the case of United States versus Binetti, which centers on a Tennessee ban on the medicalization of minors, and for which we filed an amicus brief in October. I'm also pleased to report that the video recording of our recent panel discussion at the Seattle Public Library is now accessible on our YouTube channel. Particularly impactful was the address by detransitioner Elle Palmer, who bravely spoke about her experience publicly for the first time, bringing many of the attendees to tears. Carol Danzero, another of the panelists at the event, wrote about it in a Substack post that also includes a transcript of her speech titled "Gender Ideology, a Devastating Central Issue of Our Day." Both the New York Times and the Atlantic recently published articles acknowledging that the overreach by gender identity ideologues did in fact contribute to the electoral shellacking Democrats received at the ballot box in November. While acknowledgement is a good start, both pieces recommend that Democrats adopt a more moderate, middle-of-the-road approach going forward, as if tweaking is all that's needed to turn the ship around. As Kristen, our chief of staff, writes in a Substack post, the New York Times article, "Transgender Activists Question the Movement's Confrontational Approach," highlights calls for a strategic shift in messaging to counter diminishing public support. However, no approach to transgender activism is rational when the ideology's foundation rests on denying biological reality. The transgender movement's issue isn't merely its confrontational tactics, it's the flawed premise at its core. Similarly, Eliza Mondegreen points out the flaws in Jonathan Chait's recent article in The Atlantic, "Moderation is Not the Same Thing as Surrender," which attempts to make the case that Democrats do not, in fact, face a choice between championing trans rights and completely abandoning them. As Eliza explains, in search of middle ground, Chait finds himself in no man's land. What he proposes will satisfy no one and solve nothing. Trans activists will never accept an asterisk, i.e., woman for all purposes except when it really matters, and women's rights campaigners will never surrender the language they need to make the still simmering conflict visible. Last week, I mentioned that plaintiffs in the Icons Back lawsuit against the NCAA, Mountain West, and San Jose State were seeking emergency injunctive relief prior to the Mountain West Championship volleyball tournament, scheduled to commence on the 27th, hoping to have male athlete Blair Fleming declared ineligible to compete and to negate losses by teams that forfeited games against SJSU during the regular season. Unfortunately, that relief was denied both at the circuit court and appellate court levels. One bright spot in this whole mess is that even after defeating Utah State in the first round of play, Boise State held the line by forfeiting its semifinal match against San Jose State, ending its hopes of reaching the NCAA tournament. Another is that San Jose State lost the championship to Colorado, so will not advance to the NCAA tournament set to begin next weekend. Hopefully, this will be the last we see of Fleming on a women's volleyball court. Of note, in its coverage of the event, the New York Times achieved a new low by referring to females as non-transgender women when discussing NCAA rules about acceptable testosterone levels in women's sport. Ending on a more positive note, last week, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine signed SB 104 into law, also known as the Protect All Students Act. The bill requires that restrooms, locker rooms, and change rooms be designated as single-sex in all public K-12 schools, as well as colleges and universities. That's all I have today. Thank you.
Hello from Australia. The social media minimum age bill passed through federal parliament last week, banning under 16s from social media, despite only 25 hours being given for public submissions and 3 hours for Senate hearings. Despite also gaps in the bill, such as what exactly counts as social media, the government confirmed that they believed platforms such as YouTube did, but that pornography platforms and things like OnlyFans did not. And there is also a gap in how age will be checked by the platforms. So the main concern for us in this context is privacy and the government's crackdown on freedom of expression, coupled with new laws on anti-vilification and hate speech that have come in and that are in the process in different jurisdictions that are very broad. Meanwhile, an opinion piece was published in the Brisbane Courier Mail asking for the reinstatement of Gillian Spencer, a child psychiatrist who was suspended for questioning the affirmation model and encouraging her colleagues to learn about the concerns. She sent colleagues copies of Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier. Her trial for wrongful dismissal is due to commence in the new year. And the journalist Des Horton also asked Queensland to stop giving children puberty blockers. In 2022, the Queensland Children's Gender Service engaged with 922 children. 80 children in that year were placed on puberty blockers and 102 children were placed on cross-sex hormones. Former Queensland Minister for Women prior to the recent election, Shannon Fentiman, told Queensland Parliament, "I want to be clear that I define a woman as someone who identifies as a woman, and that the Queensland government defines a woman as someone who identifies as a woman. The new government has changed to the Liberal Party, so we wait and see." Dr. David Gillespie, a former GP and current member of New South Wales Parliament, although I believe he is retiring, has asked the New South Wales Parliament why Australian health departments have not responded to the emerging research, such as the CAS review, the same as other jurisdictions, and pulled back on the administration of puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones to children. He suggested a psychological resistance to admitting you've been, quote, bloody stupid, and called the practice voodoo gender theory. On 28th of November, a book called Devastated, How Gender Ideology is Tearing Australian Families Apart was launched at the Federal Australian Parliament House. It documents the experiences of 9 Australian families who claim their children were transed by institutions behind their backs. The Star Observer called the launch entirely right-wing, despite photos and accounts that it also published showing other attendees such as LGBT groups and feminists, former supporters of the Labor Party and the Greens. A 15-year-old girl has been given access to wrong sex hormones despite the father not supporting the application and the judge noting the concerns of detransition and the lack of legal precedent that exists on the consequences of that. He called it, quote, regret syndrome, which pathologizes the emotional impact, but also normalizes it and takes it outside the scope of preventable consequences of choices that don't have to be made. One of the significant reasons the teen was given the hormones was because he has been on puberty blockers since 2022 and has seen significant deterioration in bone mass in just the last 12 months. He needs to go through puberty to restore bone mass, so this will now be done on female sex hormones. That's it this week from Australia.
Hi, this is Janet from New Zealand. This week we had some more responses to the kind of waffly non-committal Ministry of Health report on puberty blockers, and also some more responses to the position statement issued by the Association of Psychotherapists Aotearoa in New Zealand, where this association pressures therapists to take an affirmative approach to gender and suggests that therapists should do therapy themselves if they have a problem with that. There's a feeling that the Ministry of Health may be trying to protect itself from future condemnation or legal action by stating that medical professionals should inform their patients that there is no evidence of the effectiveness or safety of puberty blockers, and yet not taking any decisive action against them. It has been suggested that this seems to be delaying the inevitable, given how much worldwide knowledge there now is against them, and given the fact that many countries have banned their use for gender dysphoric youth. Some of these concerns have been expressed by Yvonne van Dongen, a New Zealand journalist, in an interview in The Platform, which is a New Zealand sort of slightly alternative media platform. She slightly right of centre as well. Yvonne also expressed concern that children under the care of Oranga Tamariki, the Ministry of Children, are at a higher risk for these treatments because a lot of them do identify as rainbow. So I'll put some links to all of these things up afterwards in the chat. So on the 30th of November, we held a WDI, Australia-New Zealand webinar with New Zealand speakers. So that was on Saturday night. This was well attended by about 50, I think, with up to about New Zealand participants. So they're still a little bit low, the New Zealand side of it. And we had a great discussion after the three speakers. So Suzanne Levy, I'll talk about the three speakers now. The first one was Suzanne Levy, and she spoke about Speak Up for Women's submission to the Law Commission about proposed changes to the Human Rights Act. So Speak Up for Women's submission emphasises the importance of sex being clearly defined in this act. And Speak Up for Women have started a petition to ask that sex is defined biologically in the Human Rights Act, and I'll put a link up to that petition. The second speaker was Jill Ovens, and she spoke about the Women's Rights Party's joint submission with the Women's Declaration International New Zealand on the Improving Arrangements for Surrogacy Bill. The bill proposed by the Law Society is not as bad as an earlier private member's bill introduced by MP Tamati Coffey, who has had 2 children via a surrogate mother and is raising them with his gay partner. He wanted to remove all parental rights from the birth mother even before the birth. The new bill recognises the birth mother as the first legal parents, as does the current law, and the right of the mother and child to have some time together after the birth. The Women's Rights Party submission emphasised the harm that surrogacy can do to both the mother and the child. It noted that while commercial surrogacy is illegal in New Zealand, it is closely connected to commercial enterprises such as fertility services. It stated the opposition of the Women's Rights Party to all commercial, exploitative and international surrogacy, and it also stated the unequivocal position of the Women's Declaration International to all surrogacy as a violation of women's reproductive integrity. The submission suggested that the Law Commission should be asking questions about whether surrogacy can ever be non-exploitative, non-coercive, or free from harm to women and children. So I'll put a link up to that submission. The third speaker was Hilary Oxley, and she spoke about a discrimination complaint that LAVA, who are the Lesbian Action for Visibility Aotearoa, is taking to the Human Rights Commission about their exclusion from the Out in the Park event at the 2021 Wellington Pride Festival. LAVA had wanted to display a map of Wellington sites of historical, political and social significance to lesbians. LAVA was excluded and attacked for being, quote, transphobic, which apparently means asserting that lesbians are same-sex attracted and that biological sex exists. LAVA has been refused any funding for their case, so they are conducting a fundraiser to help with the massive legal fees, which may be around $100,000. So people who want to make a donation can go to their website, which is lava.nz, and I'll put links up to that too. That's it from me. Thanks.
Hello from Canada. I'm pleased to announce that it's not all just a bunch of doom and gloom this week. Last Friday, WDI Canada sent a letter to all Canadian senators and members of parliament, as well as the Attorney General. The letter implores them to vote no on Bill C-63 and outlines the reasons why this bill will destroy freedom of expression in our country. Bill C-63 I've described before, but it's going to create new definitions of hate speech and make really steep punishments for that. So it will be really bad for gender critical feminists in Canada. And that letter can be viewed on the WDI website under the Canada tab. We've also provided a template letter to assist members in contacting their MPs about the bill, and that letter also can be accessed under the Canada tab on the WDI website. Last week, I shared the story of Emo Township. Just as a refresher, the town was asked in 2020 to declare June Pride Month and fly the Pride flag outside the town hall. The town declined this request, which resulted in a years-long legal battle. Last week, the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal ordered the town to pay $10,000 to Borderland Pride, and the mayor was also ordered to pay $5,000 and to take a Human Rights 101 course offered by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. The mayor, Harold McQuaker, has now refused to pay this fine, saying, "I utterly refuse to pay the $5,000 because that's extortion." He also said he will not be taking the Human Rights 101 course. "I don't hate anybody," he said. "We just don't have a flagpole at our town hall." In an open letter published by Borderland Pride, they stated, "Borderland Pride will donate 1/3 of the financial compensation paid to us by the municipality directly to the Emo Public Library on the condition that it host a drag storytime event free to all to attend on a date of our choosing this year." This is a library that is at risk of closing due to a severe lack of funds. So it appears that the Pride organization is attempting to capitalize on the desperation of this library to push drag queens on the children of the town. The town council will be meeting today to decide whether they will pay the $10,000 fine or appeal. So we'll stay tuned and see how that goes. And that's all I have from Canada this week.